This is Life Worlds, the place where we explore life through other eyes and minds. Let's flip the script and discover how to orient your world around nature. I'm Alexa Permanish. Come join me as we get down and forage for fungi, stalk coyotes, draft laws for rivers, hum with beehives, sing bird language, and help beavers to dam again. Let these stories spark your reconnection to nature's multiverse. Learn how to bring ecosystems back to life, become an agent for other intelligences, and begin to see how you too are the sum of all life worlds. You're listening to the full episode of Unexpected Agricultures with Michael Ableman. Greetings, everyone. This is Alexa, and welcome to the very first episode of the show. I couldn't be more delighted to have you here and for us to be exploring the many life worlds of our planet together. Over the next 10 episodes, we're going to be speaking with ecologists, lawyers, technologists, artists, and a whole host of practitioners who have learned to get really, really close with the non-human world around them. Through them, we're going to learn what nature needs from us to thrive and regenerate, and how we can begin to develop those skills ourselves. As you'll see, each of our guests is going to reveal extraordinary lessons that we can learn from other species and how we're all the better off when we're able to experience the world as one that is shared with other life. We're going to kick off the show by getting our feet down in the soil to talk about farming and agriculture. This is because farmers and those who work the land are very often the people whose entire days are spent immersed in the life worlds of the land, in the delicate stalks of green, the humming of pollinators, the pungent smells of cardamom or vanilla or Creole maize, the beating of bird feather, and the crunch of parched soil underfoot. Their very survival depends on them seeing and interpreting the world around them through all of these other eyes. I personally have immense respect for farmers. I grew up spending a lot of time on farms, and my relationship to food has been defined by traveling all around North and South America, spending time in the fields, trying to understand just where our food comes from, and the astounding care and energy it takes to grow even the humblest sprout. I don't have to tell you here how destructive many of our current agricultural practices are to both the planet and to human health. Today, we're going to look at approaches that can help steer our global food system in a different direction. Michael Ableman has been an organic farmer for over 50 years and is considered one of the pioneers of the organic farming and urban agriculture movements. He was the founder of Soul Food Street Farms, North America's largest urban farm, employing people who have been impacted by long-term addiction and mental illness. This experience has proven to him how farming can help to heal human hearts and minds, and he's going to share with us his intimate approach of farming, bringing us on a walk around his farm on Salt Spring Island, dropping clues and hints as to how you too can begin to listen to the land. Farming, agriculture, and eating are some of the most direct acts that you can practice day to day in caring for the earth, because nowhere else is our dependence on nature so embodied, so visceral, and so raw. The Japanese farmer and philosopher Fukuoka once said that the ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings. I would add to that, very much inspired by what our guest shared today, that the goal of farming is also for humans to learn how to become a reciprocal species, one that supports and feeds countless non-human lives through our acts of farming and growing and feeding. As this is our first time together, I want to point you towards the Life Worlds website, where I will be compiling pages of resources and links on all of the subjects that we discuss here. For this episode, there will be pages on farming and food and agriculture. We now travel across the American continent to spend time with Michael Ableman. So to kick off, Michael, I wanted to chat about your relationship to agriculture and farming, because that will be the focus of this conversation, and food systems more broadly. You've been an activist, you've been an organic farmer since the 1970s, so like way ahead of the trendy curve, but just doing what was the right thing from the get-go. You've authored a bunch of books all about farming and urban agriculture. founded North America's largest urban agriculture project in the east side of Vancouver in British Columbia. And you've been a photographer and a road tripper as well for some of the books you've been writing. I mention all that because I wanted to ask you, why have all of these different approaches been important for you in your relationship to agriculture? You didn't just choose farming or photography or writing or activism or project management. You're like, I'm going to do it all. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your relationship to each of those things and how they have woven together in your life.
That's an awesome question. Yeah, I didn't really begin this journey with, kind of any preconceived ideas as to where I was going or what I was doing. In fact, my life has been this amazing and great unfolding. Um, I do remember when I was quite young, in my late teens, looking around at the world and wondering what could I possibly do as a livelihood that did not require sucking the life out of the world. And it sounds like a strange question, but for me, I saw so many endeavors that were contributing to, kind of the great unraveling of ecosystems and social systems and cultural systems and political systems, all with a primary goal of making a living, or in some cases, for many people, going well beyond that, going well beyond their personal needs. And so I was really curious. I thought, well, what can I do that I can actually support myself and my family, but at the same time will have a positive effect? And that was a question that lingered and hung. And then, by some amazing miracle of fate, I was um, uh, found myself in an agrarian commune at the age of 18. uh, with an amazing experience at 18 years old, managing a 100-acre organic pear and apple orchard. It was one of the first organic orchards in North America. I knew nothing about orcharding. I knew nothing about farming. I was managing a crew of 30 people, most of whom were older than I was. The orchard had been abandoned for 15 years, so you couldn't even see the alleys down the middles of the rows. The branches had intertwined so much. I had a 1930s copy of a wonderful book called Modern Fruit Science, the journal from the guy who had last run the place and given up in frustration, and a copy of Goethe's famous quote, which I still have on my walls: whatever you can do or believe you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. And that quote was attached to the door of my 20-foot unheated trailer where I live. And it's still attached. It's on many walls in my house. And so it was incredible because I went to work each day with 30 of my friends. And unlike so many experiences in agriculture at that time, I went to work, it was like being in an all-day party. We joked and we played and we speculated on the fate of the earth. We ate our lunch together under the shade of the trees. And at the end of the day, instead of feeling like I had been chained to some mind-numbing drudgery, I felt like I had attended this amazing all-day party. That orchard thrived. Those apples and pears gained a reputation around the country. And while I know that a certain element of the success of that fruit was the warm days and cold nights of that high desert valley, I'm pretty sure that the amazing flavor of that fruit and its success was more tied to the passion of that group of people, the energy they had working with each other and with that land. And that's what really infused that experience. And that infused my love of agriculture. That was the beginning. And so, to answer your question, I continued from there. I had a fire about agriculture, but I also at a certain point realized that I wanted to communicate my experience. And I'll stop there.
With an old book, a journal, and a quote, you managed to assemble this ragtag team of 30 people to care and create some of the country's best tasting fruit. And that's a really important insight that we'll probably return to, which is this notion that the quality and taste of food is not just linked to its nutrient density or the soils out of which it was grown or even the climatic conditions, but something about the quality of the people that nurtured that plant. And that's probably very difficult to quantify. And yet, I think anyone who's also worked with chefs or in kitchens would say the same. There's something about the human relationship to what's being tended to and the reciprocity that makes for better food. And I think we will touch on that in a little bit when we speak about your current farm. But before we go there, if you can fill in whatever creative way you'd like that gap between where you are today and that young bootstrapping guy living out of his unheated trailer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to add to your comment, I mean, the best fertilizer is the farmer's, footsteps on the field. That energy piece, you're right. It sounds very woo woo, and and it is pretty hard to quantify, but that's really a key element. And so, moving forward from there, I managed to uh, move from there to an incredible project north of Santa Barbara, California, 12 and a half acre farm that I developed and became an island of agriculture floating in a sea of tract homes and shopping centers. It was a piece of land zoned for 52 condominiums. We produced 100 different products, different fruits and vegetables. We fed somewhere around 500 families on that land, ran extensive education programs. And in the end, we were faced with the 1 year to save that land from imminent development. Uh, and we were successful. In 8 months, we raised, it was $1 million at that time, equivalent to about 8 to 10 million in today's dollars. We formed a nonprofit called the Center for Urban Agriculture, which took ownership. We put that land under one of the first active agricultural conservation easements in the U.S., which gave the land a voice. It was a legal document attached to the title that said this land must remain in agriculture, and went even further to state what type of agriculture, and that education had to be a component as well. And that became kind of my the grounds in which I was able to both develop myself as a farmer, but also develop some of my ideas, some of the possibilities, the place where agriculture could become a stepping off point for inspiring and educating the community in so many other areas. We experimented with all kinds of events, cultural events, music events. This is well before all this was happening. I mean, these kinds of things sounds very typical to what we see today, but this was 30 years ago, 40 years ago, actually. And so in the process, during that time, the nonprofit that we formed, I called the Center for Urban Agriculture, because that farm had become, as I said, surrounded by development. We were also at the time invited to develop a project in Watts in Los Angeles on a 3-acre plot that was the former home of the Watts Health Clinic. Was burned down during the uprisings in the 60s. And we developed a farming project there. And eventually I began to see that there was enormous potential to create both economic enterprises and food producing plots on very small pieces of land within our cities. And this became kind of the template for my interest in urban agriculture. I saw that at that time, many urban areas had a plethora of abandoned lots, many people without work, no access to fresh food. And I thought, well, what if we could, to use Wendell Berry's quote, solve for pattern? What if we could create enterprises that addressed all three of those issues? And so we, as I said, we developed that project in Watts. It had mixed success because if you haven't noticed, my skin is not black or brown. I'm not from that neighborhood. And while elements of that project continue to this day, in the end, we had to leave it for the people who live there. But if you fast forward, I don't know how many years, 30 years and 1,400 miles north, I was able to, in the city of Vancouver, establish something that has been quite successful and has addressed some of my concerns about development that I had way back when. We have learned to do some things right. And we now run a project which you referred to. Some people say it's the largest urban agriculture project in the world. I don't know if that's true. It is a social enterprise employing people dealing with long-term addiction, mental illness, material poverty. And it has a very simple mission, which I can tell you about if you want me to continue. I'm talking a lot. Basically, it's incredibly simple. Our intention for that project was merely to give people a reason to get out of bed each day, a sense of purpose and belonging, fertile soil to put their hands in, a sense of producing for the local community, something real and tangible. And we're working with people who have had a pretty tough go. And where success is a very difficult thing to determine. But I will say that we have people working with us to this day who've been with us for 13 years, who never previously held a job for 4 or 5 months, who still are with us. We were given 6 months to survive in this project. We're now, as I said, 13 years into it. Hundreds of people have had training and employment opportunities. And I think the project has inspired similar endeavors in other parts of the country and the world. So it's pretty exciting.
I think it's such a inspiring example of what can be done in a massive city's unused parking lots, right? Like you basically went to this devoid, concrete emptiness. And if I remember correctly, when you first told me about this, you guys had to custom design these little, probably just not the right word for it, these boxes, right? Like these movable trays that the farming could be done on, so it could be portable and shifted around. So you custom design. Maybe that's even worth talking about. But you custom designed these farming plots, and then, as you said, people who are experiencing material poverty and previous forms of drug addiction, and for people who haven't been to downtown Vancouver, it's also been described as one of North America's largest slums. It's a pretty sad place. A lot of people suffering there. And yet you've filled these empty, vacant plots with soil and plants and life, and in a way, the healing of the individuals who are farming there. And I think for people who haven't buried their hands in soil or tended to a garden, like, why does this transform people? Why do you think it is that people who haven't held a job consistently their whole lives turn up at an urban agriculture project and they're like growing some herbs or some, fruits, and then that transforms them? Why is that?
Well, first of all, just to provide some context, we're producing 35 tons of food annually on large parking lots on roughly about 4 acres, using this innovative system that you described of boxes that both isolate the growing medium from either contaminated soil or pavement and allow us to move on short notice, which is an issue for every city. So these are production farms, and these are real jobs. And in fact, interestingly enough, our staff who never had farming experience bristle if someone refers to the farms as gardens or them as gardeners. It's awesome. I never thought I'd hear that instinct, but it's wonderful. And one of our staff, who I was just with the other day, Nova, who was a former meth addict, street kid living on Granville Road, Granville Street, coined the term "farmily," which I love. Which is I made it the chapter of one of the chapters in the book that I wrote about the project, and I love that because it really embodies the essence and the importance of what we've organized. This sense that the farm is more than just a production unit or a factory for food or a place to go to work. It is a place to connect, okay? And it's a place where people come and they feel they belong and they feel a sense of purpose. And I have never attributed we're not social workers, we're not drug addiction experts. We're merely farmers that realize that the simple act of growing food, of giving people an opportunity to do something real in their lives, and that sense of purpose and belonging could have a profound impact on their lives. And I'm not sure I understand entirely how that works. I do know that there are physiological implications to working with living soil. We know that's actually been studied and demonstrated that working with soil affects people's serotonin levels. Um, I have seen remarkable things where, one of our first neighborhood farmers, Kenny, uh, who said to me, I come to work feeling miserable and I leave feeling renewed and happy. Now, what's going on with that? It's nothing that we are doing. This is something they are doing for themselves. We have merely set the table, provided this incredible place for people to come to. It's a safe environment. We provide some training. Um, we provide, the acres of soil and boxes and direction. But these folks are doing this for themselves, and the results have been really amazing.
What you're describing, it reminds me a lot of, the book Once for Revolution by Fukuoka. And he says the ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of the human soul or human beings.
Yes, I love that.
Right? You give 2 thumbs up there. And it is fascinating how that act of farming can be how it's not about the farming or the agriculture. Of course it is, but there's this deeper process that's taking place inside of people. Do you think that a part of what those folks at Soul Food Street Farms or other people who are working the land, do you think that it has something to do with participating with quote unquote nature or other forms of life? Or perhaps in this example, it's it's the human fabric that's being woven.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can only kind of look to myself and see and acknowledge the healing that I have experienced as a result of the work that I have ended up doing. And I know that there are many days where I don't want to get out of bed in the morning, and maybe the weather's cloudy or it's rainy or especially in our shoulder seasons here, it can be tough to go out and want to work. There's something that happens once I get my feet on the ground and actually get out the door and I'm out in that space. Something shifts almost immediately. Um, and I just feel so lucky that I personally have this opportunity to do that work, because I think in many ways it's saved my own mental health, especially through these last 3 years. And so I'm not in other people's heads. I have heard lots of stories. Our staff are very free and open with talking about their issues and with talking about their experience at Soul Food. And but when I reflect on my own experience, I kind of get it. I understand um, that something is happening when we reconnect with natural systems, because we are essentially, I mean, we are part of those systems. We have just forgotten that. when we put ourselves back into the world where we truly belong, and immerse ourselves in that world, whether it's through farming or taking a hike or walking through the woods or whatever, um, we begin to reclaim that which is truly who we are. And I think, and it's hard for me to articulate some of this because, wow, I mean, um, it for me, it's total magic. I can leave my house feeling I don't want to go to work. I'm not feeling great today. I'm grumpy. And, I'm out there and an hour later, I'm happy. And I see that with our staff and something's going on. Maybe you can articulate it.
I actually want to comment on, I think there's something different to working the land through farming or other means and just taking a hike. And I don't mean to diminish taking a hike. I obviously am an avid hiker myself, but there's something about the even closer observation and sensitivities that you need to manage a farm versus prancing through the woods with delight and picking things up and just being, a joyful child, right? And they each have their place, but there's something about, as you said, observing and being inside of a natural system, being part of that system itself, but knowing that you have to listen really closely, otherwise the harvest might not turn out quite right, or you plant too early, or you plant too late, or you don't. So the stakes are higher,
Yeah.
right? And I think that when the stakes are higher, something interesting happens. And so, what's your approach to? Right now, you're in Foxglove Farm on BC, which is a farm that you've been running for quite some time. And what's your approach to farming there? And maybe for folk who are listening who have never farmed, what's it like to observe a season and tend to the different crops that are there? And if there's anything you can describe that can make it come alive, like what is it to farm with sensitivity?
I mean, there's no question. I don't have any formal training in agriculture or just about anything else except maybe the visual arts a little bit. But one thing that I did realize early on was the incredible importance of observation as being the probably the most important agricultural skill. And I have developed that one skill quite thoroughly, to the degree that it's almost too much, where I can be on a road trip and I'm looking out the window at, flying down the highway at other people's fields, making judgments, or observations. It's amazing what you learn to see. And so I, on a 2 or 3 times a week, I walk through my fields with a notebook. And while I don't hear voices, the plants and the animals and the soil do in fact tell me what they need. And I mean that very directly. I can look at a situation, I look at a field, and I know almost immediately what's required. What's the how are the leaves turgid or are they drooping? What are the subtle color differences? I mean, green is not just one color. There's a thousand different gradations of green, and what do they all mean? How does the soil feel to me and smell and sometimes even taste? And what is that telling me? What various little critters have shown up from one day to the next, and what are they able to communicate to me? And what are the plants communicating with them in order to have attracted them or having repelled them? So many subtle and not so subtle cues that come from those walks. And from those walks results a very clear list of what we need to do, the projects and the jobs for the week and the day. Understanding what you said, this is both a incredibly spiritual practice, but it's an incredibly pragmatic and practical practice because I farm for a living. We do this as an enterprise just as we do at Soul Food. While I love the spiritual and ecological and social aspects of it, we have to pay the bills. And so, so what's amazing to me is um, that we have somehow found a way to marry natural systems agriculture to a market economy. The instincts for both and the are often appear not to be on the same track, but somehow we make that work. It's really fascinating, and I find that we make that work better when the relationships are first and foremost. So direct marketing is what my preference is. So farmers markets and box programs or community supported agriculture programs, marketing programs that actually build relationships versus the more anonymous ones of loading a truck for distant ports. So for Foxglove Farm, I mean, this is a 120-acre farm. It's the remnants of an original homestead. And when we arrived, my first questions and first sense was, whose shoulders am I standing on here? I wanted to understand, for example, why the original homesteaders traveled up the mountain to this place and what they were thinking when they came here. It was entirely in forest and cleared trees that were 15 feet in diameter with little, they didn't have the right saws to do it. And what was behind that? What was their instincts? What was going on here before that time? Excuse me. With the Coast Salish people who moved in and around the lake that we border, and what were they seeing? What did this land look like at that time? And all the different generations that came before us, whose shoulders are we standing on? And trying to understand first and foremost, what are the expectations of the land that I'm on? Not just what are my expectations from it, what does it want from me? And from that, we spent probably a year or two just making drawings and planting the farm on paper and understanding how the air moved and the light moved and what the possibilities were. And we built a farm that both has an incredible aesthetic. We have discovered that there is an alignment between the one's visual instincts as a visual artist, which I know you are and I am, and good agriculture. It's fascinating. There are a lot of really successful farmers that I know who are remarkable artists, and there's a relationship there, the observation piece, right? And so we designed the farm on paper. We built it with a core base of perennials as the kind of the rooted element of the whole system, with the annuals kind of moving in and around those perennial systems. The truth is the annuals pay the bills. The perennials provide the heart and the soul and the anchor for the system. And so we have this incredible seasonal progression of primarily Mediterranean fruits and vegetables. Heirloom tomatoes and peppers, French melons, white asparagus and green asparagus, fresh baby ginger, which you experienced some of. How was that, by the way?
It was so tangy. I loved it.
This amazing array of things and many products that no one believed could certainly grow in this climate at 1,200 feet on the side of a mountain. And that's part of my rebellious and ornery and nature to try those things that everybody says cannot be done, and so our primary way of working here is direct and clear observation, respect of the natural systems that intersect and surround our fields, because every field is intersected and surrounded by native forest, and there's something going on there that's I don't entirely understand, but there's no question that there's a connection between the dynamic fertility of our farmed fields and the forests that surround them. Uh, don't ask me to explain it scientifically. I cannot. I just see it. um, and to respect that we are in the heart of the island's prominent and dominant watershed, and that we need to know that everything that moves through this land leaves cleaner, pure, and as good as when it enters, so that the downstream impact of our work is very important, because this farm sits in a very critical, sensitive ecosystem, um, and to also respect and honor and acknowledge all those who came before us, because and that's kind of been the subject of a book I've been working on for 8 years, which could take me another 8 years. I don't know, but called Passing Through.
I'm struck by what you shared in the beginning of the call, which was, when you were a young kid, you had this feeling of not wanting to suck life out of the world. And here you are sharing that at least the part that you can play is that the water that flows through your land is cleaner and fresher, and that you're caretaking what the land wants from you, not what we want from the land. And so, I think just it's worth honoring that and pausing. It seems like you're kind of living up a little bit to what you intended to do when you were younger. That switch from not from okay, what can we get from this ecosystem? How can we harvest this? Even like how can we harvest this well is a very, very different question. And the difference might be subtle, but I think the difference is critical. It's a very different question to how can I serve this ecosystem or this place by my harvesting, by my cutting, right? In the first example, you're serving a human endeavor, or even you're doing your very best to be sincere, but there's still the goal is oriented towards the betterment of your system, whatever it may be, your human system. In the second example, your harvest or process of harvesting is serving that land first and foremost. And if that land is served, then your farm will do well. And so I'm curious, do you ever get the feeling, without wanting to anthropomorphize too much, but when you said this part of communication that the plants tell you what they need, do you ever feel like you're serving someone else beyond your clients at the farm and your own livelihoods with your family? Like, do you have a sense that there's an otherworldly community that you're also serving?
Awesome question. I love it. Absolutely. I mean, I will reveal that early this winter I spent quite a bit of time doing some journeying to other realms with some help from plant medicine, which I must say I'm really very happy that there is an acceptance to that now taking place, because I think our society desperately needs that. And the realization that I had and the reminder that I was given was that I spend so much of my life living in this very thin wafer of all the dimensions that exist. Kind of like if you lived in a house with 20 rooms and you never left the corner of one of them and never even opened the doors of the other rooms. And that experience that I had earlier this winter was so profound, because it reminded me that of all these other dimensions that exist, and that we as humans are, as I said, spend most of our time living in one sliver. And when you enter the world of the farm and of farming and the community that surrounds the farm, both human and non-human, you have to accept that unlike the dominant industrial model of agriculture, where the farmer is like the general standing, in the field, fighting off invading forces, you have to, at some point, if you're going to do it well, find your way into the slipstream of biological activity of the natural world and see yourself as only one piece of this system. To truly be successful, you have to find that place where you are not necessarily the controller or the only element. You are just a part of many elements, and to find that place it's a wonderful feeling. It isn't that you don't have a major role to play. It isn't that you don't have work to do, or all the innumerable practical aspects of what we do. But if we don't find uh, some sense of humility in this process, then we will fail ultimately, And when I say fail, I'm not talking about success or failure on the basis of economic or I'm talking about in the long term, And so, yeah, I don't know if I've answered any of your questions, but I think the question was exceptional and reminded me once again um, that I'm just a one link in this chain, And the other thing at 67 years old is that I'm finally coming to terms with my own mortality and that this thing is so brief. And, you know, um, what can I do with the short time I have here that's really going to be meaningful,
Thank you so much for sharing that about the journey you took. I do agree with you that under certain safe conditions, those kinds of things can be um, incredibly disarming when we're very used to having so many defenses up against the world. It strikes me when you speak about this general in the field and commanding the fleet of weed spraying robots and monitoring everything from a distance. I and this kind of brings us to what's broken about the current food system. There are those who argue that yes, organic, regenerative, holistic, it's great, but that cannot be quote unquote scaled. It cannot feed the planet and the amount of humans that we are with the amount of arable land that's left and that will be left. With rising temperatures, we will need some balance of industrialized, general wielding farming combined with the kinds of approaches that you describe. What would you say to that? I mean, do you think that we will need both, or that those farms, those massive, I'm sure you've flown over them or even been in them as you drive past in your car, judging what they could be doing. Um, what do you see as the future of those kinds of systems? Do we need them?
That's a really good question. I've I spent a lot of years after my first book came out in the early 90s and up until really 4 or 5 years ago, in the winter months doing quite a bit of speaking at events and universities, and it it always amazed me that inevitably on occasion someone would raise their hand and say, well, Mr. Ableman, and when they use the word mystery that you're in trouble, but we love what you're doing, and your good, all your good work, but how is it that you think that the system of farming that you're proposing is going to feed the world? And so that's been, that was a common question, and my answer was always that it wouldn't, and the reason I say that is that I think that we're we have to recognize that that we're facing a situation where we have populations that far outstrip our ability to properly take care of them. In other words, there's more people than this planet really should be supporting. This is a very difficult conversation to have, but I feel that we have to deal this idea of the of agriculture solving what is essentially a social and population issue is ridiculous. Um, We need to address this issue from many fronts. I'm not suggesting that agriculture should not be a piece of that conversation, but that there is no system of agriculture that can support populations as they're currently exploding, especially when we consider the fact that we have not been able to contain our worst impulses regarding climate and other issues. This is we're in huge trouble on that front. And so I say um, I say that, and then I say, well, but also, on every scale, uh, really sensible and smart, more sustainable, more ecological friendly agricultural systems on every scale with every product, every food product, are being demonstrated now everywhere in the world. So this is no longer the purview of a few hippie farmers with wearing tie-dye and Birkenstocks in Northern California on a small, 3-acre plot. These systems are being adopted and accepted and innovated on and improved all around the world on huge scales, 20,000 acres down to, a half an acre in the middle of the city. And so this is not uh, applying the principles of sensible, considerate, ecological agricultural systems based on nature is now infiltrated the entire network. Now, with that said, the industrial model is still entrenched and still pushing, and we have voices like Microsoft's founder. I'm losing his name now. Who is having a huge and I don't think very positive influence on other parts of the world, like in Africa. He comes from a technological perspective. I can't believe I'm not thinking of the guy's name. If you can help me out.
Yeah, it's Bill Gates and the whole green revolution, right?
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, it's very contentious.
So I mean, he's a technological, yeah. So he understands only one thing, and that's so he's applying technology to agriculture, and of course pushing a highly controversial and I think wrong agenda down there, when he could be supporting some really amazing things. I think his instincts and his desire to help are probably good. I don't know, and so I think that I don't want to diminish the fact that the industrial mindset is still entrenched in the food system, but I don't. I want to say that there are excellent models on every scale that demonstrate that we can, in fact, feed ourselves within population sensibility with systems that really take care of the land and take care of the people that are working with them.
Yeah, I want to pick up on some of the threads that you've shared as it links this question of incredibly technologized evolutions in agriculture. In the beginning, you shared this example of the 30 of you on that farm, on that apple and pear orchard, and how there was something about the fruit that just was better for whatever reason. And this notion of in Soul Food Street Farms, how when those staff members tended to those urban plots, they healed. So there's some kind of conversation or communication happening between human and land, human and farm, that is beneficial to both. And my concern, and I'll put my ag tech investor hat on now. My concern with a lot of the agricultural technological innovations are that they are missing that component of binding a human being to an ecological food system. And I think that it can be done well. I don't know in your farm if you have sensors and so on, but I think that some things can be laborious and maybe might take time. And so maybe if a farmer has a sensor telling him how much water is there, as long as he's not fully or she's not fully bypassing um, the need to check the water at all in their own intuitive sense as you would do walking the land, I think those things might be helpful. But I wonder, when we look at the amount of money, it's billions, if not trillions of dollars today that are pouring into reforming agriculture because of how destructive it's been on the planet, unfortunately. Um, I wonder what could be like criteria that people could look out for, because I know that people who also listen to this show are investors. Like, what are the criteria that people can look out for in terms of, okay, this is something that is in right relationship somehow, versus this is a um, single-mindedly technological approach that doesn't heal the land and human beings to the extent that agriculture can do. So maybe we can, jam a little bit on like what could those criteria be? Like what can people look out for? Maybe you've even seen examples that could stand up to that litmus test.
Yeah, well, Alexa, I'm not against technology if it's appropriate and not destructive. And I have pretty clear lines. For example, uh, I have no issues whatsoever with traditional hybridization of plants. What I call traditional breeding, which is breeding within similar species. But I am dead set against the arrogance of when we begin breeding within unrelated species. I think this is a very dangerous game, and we don't know what we're
What
doing.
would that be, for example?
Well, a lot of the genetic modifications that are happening, putting pig genes into spinach, or human genes into salmon, or
That's happening? Pig genes into spinach?
oh yeah, there's a lot of breeding being done. I'm giving you some of the more extreme examples, mind you, but there's actually been very little development in terms of genetic modifications in fruits and vegetables. Most of it's been grains and hay crops and commodity crops, and I think like the one of the first developments was the flavor saver tomato, which Calgene got released a tomato that would look fresh and ripe on the shelves for weeks without going off, and I got myself in a lot of trouble in the early days, earning the title of food terrorist from our friend Julia Child after a speech I gave about that tomato. But I wear that as a badge of honor. But the thing is that I'm not against traditional breeding, which is breeding within related species. In fact, that's been going on for a long time, and and a lot of farmers that I know are dependent on certain hybridized varieties that have qualities that are exceptional. And we also use a lot of open pollinated varieties that have not been hybridized. I mean, I live in both worlds. I do not support the breeding of unrelated species and a lot of the genetic modifications that are happening. I think that the incredible and overwhelming use of synthetic materials to control pests and diseases and to fertilize plants, I think, is a huge mistake, and we don't need it. We know we don't need it. When we create this living, dynamic, biologically active soil, pest and disease problems are virtually non-existent. It's the same as how you take care of yourself. When you get run down and don't eat well and don't sleep well, you are subject to all kinds of things.
What about the biological varieties of those, right? All of the new ones on the market.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very interesting. There is an arsenal of available and acceptable and legal materials for the organic grower, biological and botanical controls for that is available. And we use virtually nothing. Occasionally, I will lean on there's some bacteria. One product in particular called Bacillus thuringiensis, which is very helpful with if you have worm issues. But it is so rare on this farm that we use any controls except for exclusion. We have miles of deer fence. This is not a substitution of materials. And this is a mistake. There has been an industrialization of organic, which I railed against for years. You cannot bring the same mindset to this system and say, well, I'm going to substitute BT for malathion, or this is not the way we should be thinking about it. We should be considering our systems from a much broader ecological perspective, building a foundation in the soil and working from there, because everything else goes from there.
And as you said, there's such parallels.
No, I mean, I'm not against technology. I mean, we're talking I've got a laptop. I got my first cell phone 4 months ago. I think we use tractors. I have a wonderful electric tractor that I just got, that the Canadian government helped us buy, which I'm excited about. So
yeah, I was just going to say, the parallels between the soil microbiome and our microbiome, in terms of like the basic health that needs to be there, instead of just pumping yourself full of things that are compensating for imbalances. I can't believe that we have only a few minutes left and the time has flown by much quicker. We always try to leave people with something actionable that they can do at the end of these episodes. And I'm sure this is advice that you've given in the past, and it might be very simple, but beyond volunteering at a local farm, or sourcing from a local farmer, and participating through agriculture, through the act of eating, how can people be more involved in that? I think that deeper sense that you were speaking about, which was observing the land and asking it what it needs, to such an extent that plants may start to say in their own way, hey, I need this. Just when you see a human being who's sad, you know what they need. It's their face, it's their body posture. It's absurd to think that we can't read nature in that way. If we can read other humans, we can of course read a plant when it's quote unquote sad. How do people hone those capacities and kind of get started?
It's a great ending question. Well, I mean, first of all, I really want to remind your listeners that we live in a world, at least in North America, but I believe in Europe and other parts of the world, where only 2.5% of the population is growing the nourishment for the rest. And in my mind, that crazy number is what has created many of the problems in the food system. Almost everything can be traced to that. In order for that 2% to achieve what is impossible, they rely on techno and chemical and industrial methods in order to do that. And I get it. And in fact, I would say that one of the greatest unspoken international emergencies that we're facing is the graying of that 2%. Like I said, I'm 67 years old and I've got a lot of energy and I'll probably keep working. But many of the people that are doing this work are in my age bracket. And in spite of all the excitement and interest amongst younger people, we're still not seeing the numbers that we need and the staying power that we need to carry this on. This is a huge unspoken and international emergency. Number one, I feel like it's really critical that we find ways to encourage more people into a profession that for many years was not well respected. It is more so now. One of the best ways to do that is to demonstrate you can make a decent living doing it. I mean, you can bring up all the other reasons, but people need to know that they can support their families. And so people can support farmers in a way, never, ever question the price. If anyone had any idea what went into every product that you see, especially if you're buying direct from the grower, that's one area where your money should never be questioned. Obviously, we have to take care of those who don't have the resources to buy high quality food. That, part of my work has been in that area. But don't ever question a farmer's pricing. Support them. And if they're not growing the best food, well, go to someone who is. But find ways to encourage more younger people into this profession. Find ways to honor those who are doing it both financially and otherwise. Okay. Participate in the food system in a much deeper way than you ever have. And I believe that one of the most important things people can do is to at least grow a portion of their personal needs, whether it's on a balcony or a windowsill or a front or backyard or community garden. That alone has a huge impact on your own thinking and understanding of what it takes, but it also takes some of the power into your own hands. And I'm talking about salad greens, culinary herbs, simple stuff. In my mind, the future of the food system may be that the small percentage of farmers may no longer be relied on to grow carrots and tomatoes and those things. That should be the purview of people in their own home gardens. But the professional farmers should be relied on in the future, especially considering the numbers, that there's so few, to produce the engine of the diet, those things that we definitely cannot live with. The grains and the beans and pulses and the meats and the dairy products and those things that are absolutely required to keep us going, and that fruits and vegetables and highly perishable products should be grown close to home by individuals who are using them in neighborhoods, in urban farms, and leave the less perishable and more scaled and more skilled required products, those diet engine products, to people who are working as professional farmers, at least until we expand our population. I'm talking about the farmer population, not the human population.
Thank you, Michael. That is really, really sage advice. And you're right. I forget often just as you said, the existential threat of aging farmers and no one to take over the land. So that's really helpful, actionable advice to end on. Thank you so much. Thank you for your wisdom. And I'm going to leave links for everyone to check out, to be able to get in touch with you. And now you have a phone, so get ready to be inundated by messages. But thank you so much for your time today and for sharing so many years of experience working the land and being finally attuned to the systems that you surround yourself with. So blessings and thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexa. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and your insights and questions were awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and stay tuned for a fresh Life Worlds episode coming out in 2 weeks' time, where we will be rewilding the Earth's landscapes and learning how to reintroduce the vilified, feared, and misunderstood wild creatures back into their balance-keeping roles. I would love to hear from you, and please reach out to me on the website lifeworld.earth, where you can also find all of the show notes and an awesome open source library ranging from everything from ecology to technology and life at large. Subscribe to our email list, and I'll see you back here soon.